Some people are placed in your life not to stay, but to shake the foundation of who you thought you were. Carl Jung didn't believe in coincidences. He called it synchronicity, a deep, symbolic pattern that arranges encounters, events, and timing to awaken the unconscious within you. So, when someone enters your life and leaves an unforgettable impact, even though you can't be with them, it isn't punishment. It's psychological alchemy. It's the universe activating your individuation process. Often, these encounters feel destined. You can't explain it. The timing is off. The circumstances are complicated, and yet the emotional intensity feels ancient. This is not random. Jung would say that your unconscious mind projected something essential onto this person. Something you needed to meet in order to evolve. The connection is magnetic, but impossible. Painful, yet expansive. You are not crazy. You're being transformed. Jung believed the human psyche is built to strive toward wholeness, and that wholeness requires confronting the lost, wounded, and undeveloped parts of ourselves. And how do we find those parts? Often through another person, especially the ones we cannot possess. They reflect your shadow, your inner child, your anima or animus. They show you your deepest fears and longings, not through words, but through their very presence in your life. They stir up storms so you can learn to sail. You may find yourself haunted by someone you barely knew, or someone you loved deeply but could never call yours. You revisit old messages, dreams, songs, or moments. Why does their absence feel louder than their presence ever did? Jung would say that your psyche is still integrating the lesson. This is not about attachment. It's about awakening. You didn't meet them to have them. You met them to meet yourself. When a relationship feels spiritually significant but doesn't work out in the physical world, many people interpret this as failure. But from a Jungian perspective, this is actually success. It means your unconscious received the mirror it needed. The rejection, the distance, the impossibility all serve as symbols for an inner process. The universe sends such people to disrupt your ego's illusion of control and to ignite your soul's demand for truth. These soul-tied encounters often have patterns. They arrive suddenly. The chemistry is undeniable, and yet circumstances tear you apart. Jung might call this an archetypal pattern, where your psyche projects a mythic expectation onto the other person. You don't just see them. You see the savior, the dream, the missing piece. But this illusion must shatter. The psyche doesn't grow through possession. It grows through the collapse of false hope. That collapse is your invitation to inner work. Sometimes, the universe sends you someone you can't be with to expose how much of your identity is built around needing to be wanted. These people reveal your dependency on external love, validation, and future fantasies. You may realize you never loved them. You loved the feeling of being seen. And now that they're gone, you're forced to see yourself. That is where the real work begins. Not in chasing them, but in reclaiming your essence. Carl Jung emphasized that relationships aren't always about companionship. They're about confrontation. Not with the other, but with yourself. And often, the ones we cannot keep are the ones who bring our greatest emotional confrontations. They trigger the exact wounds we never dared to touch. Childhood abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. And yet without this emotional rupture, we remain asleep to our real needs. It's painful to realize that someone can feel like home, yet never stay. But perhaps their role was never to build a life with you. It was to remind you that you have one to build within yourself. Jung taught that the self, the deepest part of the psyche, demands integration. And we often resist this call until life shocks us out of our patterns. A love that doesn't last, yet stays etched in your soul, is one of the most powerful shocks life can deliver. You might ask, why me? Why this person? The answer lies in your unique psychic structure. Every attraction has meaning. Every heartbreak has purpose. From the Jungian lens, the universe operates not through randomness, but through meaningful patterns. The one you can't be with was chosen by your unconscious to unlock a door no one else could. And the door doesn't lead to them. It leads to your own shadow. You didn't imagine the depth. You weren't naive for feeling the intensity, but you were being guided into a confrontation with what you idealize, what you fear, and what you avoid within. That's the tragedy and the blessing of these encounters. They are soul mirrors, not soulmates. And a soul mirror reflects the parts of you that are most neglected. You may confuse that reflection with the person, but that is not who they truly are. They are a messenger, not the message. The deeper truth is that these encounters are initiations. They mark a passage between who you were and who you must become. In Jungian psychology, this is individuation, the journey of becoming whole by embracing all of yourself, not just the parts that are easy or admired. And nothing pushes you toward individuation more than loving someone who doesn't stay. The grief becomes a portal. The loss becomes a teacher. The longing becomes sacred fuel. Would you have confronted your inner wounds if they hadn't entered your life? Would you have sought deeper meaning, therapy, spirituality, or self-mastery? Often, no. It takes heartbreak to awaken the hunger for wholeness. And that is what the universe knows. That's why it sends someone you cannot hold, so that you are forced to hold yourself. The absence leaves a space, and that space becomes a womb for rebirth. From a higher perspective, these impossible connections are soul contracts. Jung may not have used that phrase, but the psychological effect is the same. They enter your life as catalysts. They agreed, consciously or not, to play the role that breaks you open. Not to punish you, but to liberate you from illusions. To peel away the fantasies and confront you with the reality of your unhealed inner world. They are not the villain. They are the flame. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This applies to love too. You may think you were destined to be with them, but the real destiny was the healing you now face. The bond was never about permanence. It was about potency. They were a symbol, a key, and once the door has opened, your obsession with the key becomes your prison. You must walk through the door alone, and that is the secret Jung never stopped repeating. Your task is to become whole, not to become someone's other half. You are not missing a person. You are missing parts of yourself. They simply revealed the gap. That's why you felt the ache, the connection, the synchronicity. Your psyche was screaming. Look here. This is where your wound lives. This is where your soul has been waiting for you. You might have tried everything to forget them. Cut contact, blocked them, buried the memory, deleted every picture, every song, every trace. But still they visit you in dreams, in memories, in unexplained waves of emotion. That's not obsession. That's not failure. That's your unconscious still processing what they represented. Carl Jung taught that what is repressed returns in disguised form, and often it returns with even more intensity when ignored. This is not about them anymore. This is about you. The part of you that still aches is the part that needs your attention. Because that person wasn't the destination. They were a map. A psychic map that pointed directly to the hidden terrain of your emotional life. Maybe they triggered your fear of abandonment. Maybe they exposed your tendency to overgive, to lose yourself in love, to become addicted to fantasy. They activated the archetypes you weren't ready to face, and now the only way forward is through integration. Some connections don't make sense because they weren't meant to be understood. They were meant to be felt. Deeply, painfully, transformationally. Jung said that the most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed. But to overcome a soul-level attachment, you must surrender your ego's desire to win, to get them back, or to make it work. You are not here to possess them. You are here to possess yourself. Think about the timing, the way they appeared out of nowhere, the way you felt seen, electrified, alive for the first time in years. And then just as quickly, the friction began. The barriers emerged. The incompatibilities surfaced. This is not bad luck. This is divine precision. The universe gave you a taste of what could be, not so you could cling, but so you could evolve. The vision was real, but it was meant to awaken you, not to be lived out in this form. Carl Jung explored the idea of anima and animus, the inner feminine in men and the inner masculine in women. Often, the people we're most magnetically drawn to are projections of these unconscious energies. You didn't fall for them. You fell for the unconscious ideal they carried for you. That's why it felt so intense, so consuming, so divine. But the more idealized the projection, the more painful the withdrawal. You weren't just grieving them. You were grieving the version of you that only came alive around them. That's why it hurts so deeply. Because in their presence, you tasted your own wholeness. You touched your divine feminine or masculine. You felt aligned, clear, emotional, alive. And now that they're gone, you feel like that part is gone too. But Jung would argue that it's not. That part of you was never dependent on them. They only awakened it. Now your task is to integrate it, to bring it home within yourself. This is how the soul matures. You may still fantasize about the what if. What if you had met earlier? What if circumstances were different? What if they change and come back? But these fantasies are traps, disguised resistance to your own evolution. Jung believed that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, we cling to fantasies to avoid the pain of transformation. But transformation requires grieving the illusion that this person held your destiny. Here's the paradox. The moment you release them completely, their purpose is fulfilled. Because the lesson was never about holding on. It was about letting go without losing your soul. The ego wants control, resolution, closure. But the psyche works through openness, tension, paradox. Your healing won't come from an apology, a reunion, or revenge. It will come from standing in the ache, facing the truth, and choosing to grow without needing to be chosen. It's tempting to spiritualize the bond, to call it twin flames, karmic connection, or past life reunion. And perhaps there is truth in those labels. But Carl Jung would bring you back to the psychological core. What part of your shadow did they activate? What emotional wound did they reopen? What did they reflect that you were unwilling to see in yourself? These are the questions that lead to liberation, not whether you'll ever see them again. Some people stay in your psyche forever, not because they're your future, but because they were your awakening. They cracked open a layer of numbness. They tore down the armor. They exposed the spiritual poverty you didn't know you had. And now you are left raw, honest, and awake. That's what they were sent for. Not to complete you, but to disturb you into wholeness. Their departure is not abandonment. It is the completion of their role. From the ruins of that connection, something new is trying to emerge. A self that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't collapse. A self that feels worthy without performance. That trusts timing, honors boundaries, and stays rooted in presence. This is the true gift of the one you couldn't keep. They initiated your becoming. And becoming is messy. It doesn't look like moving on overnight. It looks like collapsing and rebuilding again and again until your center holds. You might still feel shame. Maybe you lost yourself for a while. Maybe you chased, begged, overgave, stayed too long. But Jung reminds us, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. You are not broken. You are breaking open. Every mistake you made was a mirror, showing you where you abandoned yourself. And now, with eyes wide open, you get to choose a different path. One not based on fantasy, but on truth. Truth that you are enough. Truth that love is not about clinging. Truth that timing matters. Truth that the soul doesn't measure relationships in years, but in impact. They could have been in your life for 3 days and still changed you more than someone who stayed for 30 years. Impact is not proof of destiny. It's proof of transformation. And sometimes the most transformative people are the ones who never stay. So if you're asking why they had to leave, try asking instead, what did their presence teach me? What did their absence awaken in me? What illusion died? What truth was born? Jung believed that meaning is what heals, and these questions are your bridge from suffering to meaning. You're not alone in this. Every awakened soul has met someone they could not keep, and every awakened soul has used that pain as sacred fuel. You may feel like you'll never love again, that no one will match their energy, their vibe, their soul. But this is withdrawal, not prophecy. You are detoxing from projection, fantasy, and emotional addiction. What you really miss is the feeling of being fully alive. And that feeling doesn't live in them. It lives in you. They just activated it. Your task now is to activate it from within. Carl Jung believed in symbols, in the dream language of the unconscious. That person was a living symbol, a messenger. And like all messengers, they are not meant to be worshipped. They are meant to be understood. What message did they bring? What archetype did they embody? What story within you were they playing out? The more you decode the symbol, the less power it has to control you. This is the deeper truth. You didn't meet them by accident. You met them by design, but not the design of a fairy tale. The design of your own becoming. They were not your ending. They were your beginning. Your soul chose this. Your unconscious orchestrated it. And now that the lesson is complete, the wound is your teacher. The grief is your medicine. The memory is your mirror. And yet, that fall is sacred. That fall is necessary. The soul cannot rise until the ego breaks. And often, the universe uses love to break us, because love is the only force powerful enough to bypass our defenses. The heartbreak you're experiencing is not the end of a relationship. It's the death of an illusion. The illusion that someone outside of you could carry your wholeness. And what comes after that death is your birth into authenticity. Maybe they symbolize freedom, passion, innocence, home. Whatever you lost in them is what you must reclaim in yourself. This is why they were sent, not to provide, but to provoke, not to stay, but to stir. They came bearing the energy your soul forgot it had. And now that they're gone, that energy demands to be reawakened through your own effort, not their presence. The universe doesn't play games. It plays transformation. The person you couldn't be with is a spiritual assignment. They appeared at the exact moment your soul was ready to evolve, not your ego, your soul. The ego wants control, outcomes, stories with tidy endings. The soul wants growth, confrontation, and integration. If you feel shattered, it's because the soul is emerging from the fragments. That person didn't abandon you. They freed you. Even if it felt like loss, it was actually release. So you ask, if they were a lesson, why does it still hurt? Because growth is not painless. Initiation is not clean. When the caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it doesn't just unfold, it dissolves. Love that comes to awaken, not to stay, is the most dissolving kind. It takes with it your certainty, your identity, your plans. But what it leaves behind is truer than what was taken. You are being emptied to be filled with something real. There's a maturity that develops after this kind of heartbreak. A stillness, a deeper listening, a tenderness with yourself. You begin to see that love is not just about finding someone. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to be found, who can hold space for their own emotions, who can meet their own needs, who doesn't need another person to give their life meaning, but brings meaning to every connection they touch. It doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It means it served its purpose. Some souls are not meant to be partners. They are meant to be portals. You walk through them, not with them. And once you understand that, you stop asking the universe to bring them back. You start asking the universe to show you what they awakened in you and how to grow from it. The one you couldn't be with wasn't a mistake. They were a mirror, a mentor, a messenger. And now that the message has been delivered, it's your task to live by it. Not to recreate the past, not to wait for their return, but to embody the wholeness you glimpsed when you were with them. Because that was never theirs. It was yours all along.